It was the Tuesday before Thanksgiving when we found the ad in the local paper. Fresh, locally raised turkey, very reasonable prices. Call Mr. Wren at 555-0134. We had been struggling to find a decent turkey for our small family gathering. So when we saw the ad, it seemed like a godsend. It wasn't often that we had a chance to buy from someone who raised their own animals. The price was right, and the man, Mr. Wren, lived only a few miles away, so we decided to call. The voice on the other end of the line was gravelly, aged, but oddly calm. "You'll be needing a big bird then, just the way you like it, plump, tender, golden brown. I can deliver it to you Wednesday evening. But you better make sure you're ready. A bird like this, it's special." The words felt strange, but we shrugged them off. Old folks sometimes spoke a little oddly. When the truck pulled into our driveway the next evening, I could see him even before he got out of the vehicle. Mr. Wren was hunched over, dressed in a heavy coat, despite the warm November air. His face, pale as the moon, had a network of wrinkles that seemed to form a map of some forgotten landscape. His eyes were unsettling, small, gray, and always darting around as though he couldn't keep them still. He was carrying a large, wrapped bundle. "Here's your turkey, ma'am," he said, his voice croaky. "Fresh. Came from a good place, been raising them for years." I thanked him and handed him the cash. He didn't seem in a hurry to leave. In fact, he lingered by the door, almost like he was waiting for something. "Make sure you treat it right," he muttered under his breath, glancing over his shoulder as if he feared someone might hear. "It's more than just food. It's part of the family now." Before I could respond, he turned and walked back to his truck without another word. The door creaked as I closed it behind me, my stomach twisted by the odd encounter. That night, as we prepared for Thanksgiving, everything seemed normal. We seasoned the bird, roasted it in the oven, and set the table. But as the night wore on, I started to feel uneasy. The house was quiet, except for the ticking of the clock and the soft hum of the oven. Then, just as the turkey was finishing, a chill swept through the room. I looked up, and there, standing just outside the window, was Mr. Wren. His face, pale and expressionless, was pressed against the glass. His eyes didn't blink as they stared into the house, fixed on us. He hadn't knocked, hadn't called. He was simply standing there, watching us. I froze. My heart began to pound in my chest. The silence in the room felt suffocating. We rushed to the window, but when we opened it to shout at him, he was gone, just vanished. I couldn't shake the image of his eyes, cold and knowing. There was something unnatural about it, like he had been waiting for this moment, for us to be vulnerable, to let down our guard. Over the next few hours, I couldn't help but feel like I was being watched. Every time I glanced out the window, I half expected to see him standing there again, but he didn't return. That night, as I lay in bed, a soft tapping sound echoed from downstairs. I tried to ignore it, but it persisted, growing louder, like something or someone was at the window. I quietly got out of bed and crept down the stairs. And there he was, Mr. Wren, standing at the back door, staring into the house through the window. His face was barely visible, illuminated only by the dim porch light. I could see his eyes, those unsettling, pale eyes, and something in them made my skin crawl. This time I didn't open the door. Instead, I locked it and ran to the phone, desperate to call the police. But by the time I turned back to the window, he was gone. The next morning, I checked the turkey. It was almost to perfectly cooked. The skin was golden brown, just as Mr. Wren had promised, but there was something off about it. Something in the way the meat pulled apart, a texture that didn't seem quite right. I had no idea what he had done, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something dark had been infused into it. Something wrong, something unnatural. As I carved the bird, I found a small, strange mark on the inside of the thigh, like a burn, a symbol etched into the flesh. And that was when I remembered his words. It's more than just food. It's part of the family now. You'll see, you'll know. I never saw Mr. Wren again, but every Thanksgiving since, I feel his eyes on me. Every year when I carve the turkey, I check for that mark, and it's always there just beneath the skin. And every year, just as we sit down to eat, I feel the chill creep through the house again, and I know he's watching us, always watching, waiting, and that bird, that turkey. It wasn't just a meal, it was a message, a reminder that Mr. Wren is still out there. I'd always loved hosting Thanksgiving, but this year there was something different, something off. I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone in the house, even though I knew that couldn't possibly be true. It started when I heard a faint noise coming from upstairs, the creak of floorboards that I had convinced myself was just the house settling. But as I passed under the staircase to check on the kids, the noise came again, louder this time, like something heavy had shifted in the attic. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe a box had fallen over. Maybe the wind was rattling something loose. I tried to ignore it, but the unease lingered, making my skin crawl. We sat down for dinner a little after 2 p.m., and for a while, everything was perfect. The kids were eating. Emily was telling a funny story from last year's Thanksgiving, and Mike was bragging about his grilling skills. But the whole time I felt a knot growing in my stomach, an anxiety that had no logical explanation. It wasn't until after the pie was served that I noticed something strange, an unfamiliar sound. It was faint at first, just a muffled scratching, but it grew louder, like nails dragging across wood. I froze mid-bite, the sound cutting through the cozy atmosphere of our family gathering. "Did you hear that?" I asked, my voice shaking slightly. Everyone paused. The room was still for a long moment, and then Mike shrugged. "Probably a squirrel in the attic or something," he said with a chuckle, dismissing my concern, but I wasn't convinced. I excused myself from the table and went into the hallway, straining my ears. The noise didn't stop. It was now unmistakable. Someone or something was moving around in the attic. I thought of calling the police, but I didn't want to ruin the holiday for everyone. It was probably just a raccoon, right? But then I heard footsteps. Distinct, slow, deliberate footsteps, too heavy for a squirrel, too human to be anything else. I felt a cold rush of fear grip me. I crept up the stairs, the sound of my own breath loud in my ears, and reached the door to the attic. The attic was dark, the light bulb in the hallway dimming as I stood at the bottom of the pull-down ladder. I was terrified, but my feet moved on their own. I grabbed the rung, pulled it down, and the ladder groaned as it extended. Every instinct screamed at me to stop, but I climbed one step at a time, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure whoever was up there could hear it. When I reached the top, I paused at the entrance, peering into the dark, musty space. There was something strange in the air, an odor, a mixture of dust and something else, something old. The attic looked untouched, just boxes and old furniture covered in sheets. But then I saw it, a shadow, barely noticeable, moving at the far end of the room. I froze. I wasn't imagining it. Someone was there. I backed down the ladder slowly, my legs shaking. I didn't make a sound. When my feet hit the bottom, I bolted back down the hallway and into the kitchen, my heart racing. I think there's someone in the attic, I gasped, trying not to cry. Mike's face hardened, his eyes narrowing. "Are you sure?" he asked, his tone suddenly sharp. "I heard footsteps," I said, breathless. He stood, his chair scraping loudly against the floor, and grabbed a baseball bat from the hallway closet. I could hear my kids in the living room, oblivious to the tension building in the house. "Stay here," Mike whispered, his face pale but determined. He went up the stairs, slow and cautious. I stood frozen in the kitchen, watching the staircase, waiting for something to happen. Minutes passed, then I heard the footsteps. This time they were coming down the stairs. It was Mike, his face ghostly white, sweat dripping from his brow. He was holding the bat like a weapon. Behind him, the attic door was wide open, the space inside still and silent. "There's no one there," Mike said, his voice tight, "but the attic looks disturbed. Boxes are moved around, and the window is open." That's when it hit me. The window was small, but an intruder could have used it to get in. And then the worst part. The window led directly to the back of the house, near the woods. I thought of the footsteps again, of the scraping noise, of the darkness in the attic. Whoever it was, they were gone, but I knew deep down that they were watching us, waiting for the right moment to come back. We spent the rest of the day in a haze of paranoia, checking every corner of the house, locking windows, and scanning the yard. The kids slept on the couch that night, and Micah and I took turns staying awake, listening for any sign of movement. But every time I closed my eyes, I could still hear those footsteps echoing in the dark attic just beyond the walls. Thanksgiving has always been my favorite holiday. The house smells of roasted turkey and pumpkin pie. My kids laugh as they help set the table, and there's that warm, golden glow from the fireplace. It's a day for family, gratitude, and tradition. But this year, Thanksgiving changed for us forever. It started around 7:30 p.m. The sun had long set, and the soft hum of the football game played in the background. We all settled in for dessert. My wife, Erin, was slicing the pumpkin pie, and the kids, Lily and James, were arguing over who got the biggest piece. I was just about to refill my coffee when I heard it, the faint rustling from outside. Living in a quiet suburban neighborhood, I brushed it off as a raccoon or the wind. But then there was a knock, a slow, deliberate knock on the back door. Nobody uses the back door, not even the neighbors. I glanced at Erin, who had frozen mid-slice, her eyes wide. Stay here, I whispered, grabbing the flashlight we kept by the kitchen counter. As I approached the back door, I could see a silhouette through the curtain. A tall figure, motionless, something about the way they stood, so unnaturally still, sent a shiver down my spine. "Can I help you?" I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. But there was no response. "Hello?" Still nothing, just that figure standing there. I turned the lock just enough to test it. Secure, relief washed over me for a moment, but then the figure moved, pressing their face against the glass. Pale, hollow eyes stared back at me, and their lips curled into a smile that was too wide. "Let me in," he whispered, his voice muffled but chilling. "No," I said firmly, my pulse racing. He didn't move, he didn't blink, he just stood there, smiling. And then, without warning, he began pounding on the glass, hard and frantic. The sound echoed through the house. "Call the police," I shouted to Aaron. The pounding stopped. I turned back to the door and saw that the figure was gone. My flashlight beam swept across the backyard, but there was no sign of him. The yard was eerily quiet, the only sound my own ragged breathing. When I returned to the living room, Erin had the phone in her hand, tears streaming down her face. The kids were clutching each other on the couch, scared but silent. "I called," she said, "they're on their way." And then we heard it, a loud crash from upstairs. Someone was in the house. I grabbed the fireplace poker, my hands trembling. "Stay here," I whispered again, though I wasn't sure I believed my own courage. The stairs creaked beneath my weight as I ascended, each step feeling like an eternity. The hallway was dark, but I could hear faint footsteps coming from Lily's room. I pushed the door open, my flashlight trembling in my hand. The room was empty, but the window was wide open, the curtains billowing in the cold November wind. And then I saw it, written on the wall, and what looked like mud or maybe something worse were the words, "Thank you for letting me in." The police arrived minutes later, but the intruder was gone. They searched the area but found no sign of anyone, no footprints, no evidence, nothing. That night, none of us slept. The words on the wall were scrubbed clean, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Thanksgiving will never feel the same. Nah, every creak, every rustle, every knock at the door sets my heart racing. Whoever came to our home at night wasn't just trying to break in. He was playing a game, and I'm terrified that he isn't done yet.